I served 2 terms of office as the elected President of Ireland from 1997 to the year 2011. A curious phenomenon in itself. I ran for election in 1997, not living in the jurisdiction in which I was running for election. As Father Don said, my background is I'm from Belfast, born and reared in the Passionist parish, but actually born and reared right next door to the Passionist monastery in Belfast. And so I was reared in the kitchen of that Passionist monastery and in the orchard. And my early life shaped by what was then a seminary, actually. There was a seminary when I was young, growing up there. That rapidly disappeared, but in my day, we had over 40 priests living in that seminary. Now there's only a handful. But it was a place of great youth and passion and fun, and most importantly, it was an intellectual and spiritual powerhouse. Only now do I realize not all children get to grow up in a monastery kitchen. So a great enrichment of my early life. And as I stood for election in 1997, I was still living and working in Northern Ireland, which is constitutionally, as you may know, part of the United Kingdom. And I ran for election in the Republic of Ireland, the independent part of Ireland that spent a lot of time and effort over many centuries trying to end its constitutional relationship with Great Britain. And I'm using very diplomatic language, as you might imagine. So I stood in an election in which neither I nor anybody belonging to me had a vote. And the Irish people did me the great service of electing me in 1997, and then again in 2004 I ran for election, but nobody was mad enough to stand to run against me, apparently. So I got a bye into that election and was there for the next, or else nobody wanted the job, actually, for the next 7 years, so 14 years. And I chose as my theme, the presidency is not like your presidency, it's not an executive role, so it's above politics. It operates in a space that really suited me, I have to say, possibly because I was reared by the Passionists. It operates in a kind of a quasi-moral stroke pastoral space. That's its strength. Yes, there's a constitutional role that you perform in relation to legislation. It's modest. In relation to formation of government, it's modest. Mostly you operate in the place of encouraging, being with, embracing, sort of setting a tone. It's being a voice for, being an ambassador for, trying to articulate something of what we are as an Irish people and what we might like to become. And in that moment, and when I was elected, it seemed to me that was 1997, when the troubles in Northern Ireland, where I had just come from, were still causing mayhem and death and violence. And if you just think of the dreadful events yesterday in Boston, just the anguish that is in so many homes today, the sheer craven, awful anguish that is in people's hearts today, who set out yesterday healthily running and today face life without limbs, face life without a child, face life without a life's partner. Multiply that up, because for 40 years that was how Belfast, Northern Ireland, my home was. Every day that possibility of a Boston existed and probably happened. So I committed myself to this idea of bridge building. Why? Because, well, blessed are the peacemakers. You're being very kind to give me that distinguished award, for which I'm very, very, very grateful. But peace was the absence of peace was what I grew up with. And the absence of peace for me, I learned the hard way, isn't war. It's anger, it's hatred, it's contempt, it's festering ignorance of, and festering contemptuousness for the otherness of others. That's the opposite of peace. And that's what ruins peace. And it ruins peace in the home, it ruins peace in the workplace, on the street, in society, between nations. That's where it starts. It starts with that festering, contemptuous anger for the otherness of other that is in no sense balanced by a respect for the humanity of the other and the right of that other to be, to exist, to breathe, to live on their own terms, to believe whatever they want to believe. That's where it starts. So that's why I made bridge building the theme of my presidency, and that's why my husband and I, when I went into, the very first day we went into the house of the president, I said to him as we went through the door, well, let's see if this great commandment to love one another really works. You'll be glad to know that 14 years later, when we left the Aris, I said to him as we were going through the door, I think it worked. And why did I think that? Well, because we set ourselves the task of trying to bring to our home and to befriend, for no other reason, incidentally, than just to befriend those who were historically estranged from us. That normally, in Irish terms, that means Northern Protestants, Northern Loyalists, who are very, very British in their orientation, and in particular, in our case, frankly, and this, some people don't like to hear this, but here it goes anyway, we felt we had to talk to the paramilitaries. Why? Because they were the people who were killing people. They were the people who were the angriest. They were the people whose anger was spilling over into killing and bombing and hurting and maiming on both sides. And each time you can imagine after Boston yesterday, the anger. You can imagine how hard it is to transcend that anger. And if you're living in an environment where that anger is fueled every single day, there's a new event to keep you angry. When does the peace enter your heart? When does the scope or the space for transcendence come? And the only way it comes is if you make the decision, if you make the conscious decision that the people you have to love, forgive, get to know, befriend, are the people you're angriest with. The people who make you really, really, really angry. And for me, that was what we decided. Martin and I were lucky we both grew up with those people. I didn't grow up in a Catholic environment. I grew up in a Protestant area. My husband also the same. Even though I say I grew up in the Passionist Monastery, let me tell you, the back of the Passionist Monastery where I grew up was the extension of that loyalist Protestant area in Belfast. And the reason I was so familiar, a figure in the orchard in the kitchen, was I had a key to the back door. My family did, because it was safer for us to go through the back door than to take the long way around and to expose ourselves to, well, sectarian attack. Simple as that. So we decided that the people we needed to befriend were the people who absolutely, over their dead bodies, would take a cup of tea with us. Over their dead bodies, would they have a bun in our house? And we set out to make those people think of us as friends. And we were very fortunate that little by little by little, over a period of 14 years, by hard work and a lot of phone calls, my husband sat on the phone and he phoned everybody who ever had a cup of tea and a bun in our house. From the people who were angriest with us, he spoke to them, every one of them, and invited them. And over a period of time, the people who were most adamant that they would never come, little by little they came, even to the point where the Reverend Dr. Ian Paisley came and had breakfast with us. And then eventually we felt that we were in a position, with all the peace work that was going on and the huge commitment to peace in Ireland, we were in the very privileged position that we were able then to offer an invitation to Her Majesty the Queen to come to Ireland for 4 days. 4 days. Now, some people want her to come in and out in a kind of a commando raid, get her in for an hour, give her a cup of tea, get her out of here before anything bad really happens. And I said no. I think we've arrived at a time of maturity where the most important thing now is to concentrate on the relationship between these islands. These islands aren't going anywhere. I know some people wish they would, but they're not actually going anywhere. Just like our neighbours aren't going anywhere, though we wish they might. We're always, the neighbours are the people we're always going to have. So we might as well be good neighbours with one another, because it's a lot easier being good neighbours than it is to be bad neighbours. And we need each other. So we invited Her Majesty the Queen, and we had 4 wonderful days. They were terrific. And I'll just finish by telling you how before I invite you just to cross-examine me, because it's better to get that interaction. I want to know what you think. And you probably have things you want to ask. But at the end of the 4 days, you can imagine historically, the relationship between Ireland and Britain extremely fraught. the colonizer and the colonized, they do not look at the world through the same pupils. We haven't cried the same tears. We haven't seen the same scenes. We look at the world in very different ways. But now we had to become friends. Now we had to be people who would be good neighbors to one another for the future, accepting each other for what we are and not necessarily wanting to change each other, but just to change each other into friends. That would be enough. And, but anyway, you can imagine there were a lot of people who didn't want her to come, a lot of people who thought, that it was the wrong thing to do, and then a lot of people who thought it was a dangerous thing to do. And they were probably, there were rights and wrongs on all sides. Anyway, we had Her Majesty the Queen come for. My view was, if she's coming, we're going to do it right, and we did. And at the end of it, she got the biggest postbag in the history of her 60 years as Queen of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I got the biggest postbag that I'd had in my 14 years as president. But one of the letters just said it all. A letter from a 90-year-old woman, and it started off most unhappily. It said, "I'm a 90-year-old Republican." Now, Republican doesn't mean in Ireland what it means here, okay? That's the first thing, okay? So Republican means, don't like the British, don't like colonizers, don't like empires, don't like monarchs, want them out of here. That's fundamentally what it means. So I'm a 90-year-old Republican. I've no time for monarchs. And in particular, the letter said, "I've no time for that monarch next door." And I thought you shouldn't have asked her. But since you did, and out of respect for you, I decided to watch the first 5 minutes on television. And then she said 4 days later, when the television nearly combusted because she hadn't turned it off, and she had cried for 4 days, she said in the end, she reflected that the 4 days were choreographed by the angels. And I thought it was a beautiful expression. Now, if she only knew the people who choreographed it, they're no more angelic now than... But there actually was a lot of truth in it, because from the very beginning we put our faith in the good Lord, that there was an integrity about this. There was a rightness about it. This is how neighbours should behave to one another. We should be able to say of history, we can't change it. We can't change it. But we can learn enough from the bad things in history to be determined that we're not going to keep on doing them, so that our children and grandchildren just keep on experiencing what we experienced. So between us, we committed to changing the future. And I think that is where we're at now in Ireland. We've our Good Friday Agreement, 15 years old, thanks to our American friends and the help they gave us. And we have a process that is now trying to turn the tide on literally centuries of anger, contempt, hatred, terrible things done one to the other, things that were handed from generation to generation like precious, precious objects, but actually carried within them the spores of hatred that in every generation outcropped in violence. We hope this is the breakwater generation. This is the generation that breaks the connection, the umbilical cord to all that bad seed, all that anger. This is the generation that commits to peace and also knows that peace is not a season. It's not something we have right now. It's something you have because you keep your foot on the accelerator pedal of doing the right thing, saying the right things, doing what you're doing here, embracing people of different faiths, different perspectives, with respect. A respectful curiosity, really full of joy in God's creation and the sheer diversity of it. I'm looking around here. There are no clones in this room because God didn't create them. Many a time I know we wish that we sat around and that everybody around the table agreed with us. That's not what happens. That's not what He gave us. But He gave us the tools to deal with diversity, and the primary tool is the tool of love. And that, I hope, is what we were able to bring to those years. So now I'll throw the floor over to you and you can interrogate me to your heart's content. So somebody's bound to have a question. Yes, you do. Go ahead there.
What would you see now as the political goal, now that there is the Good Friday Agreement? Northern Ireland is in somewhat of a process of evolution in terms of the Brexit. What would be the next step of it?
The political goal. Yes, the political goals are actually, they are subsumed into the Good Friday Agreement. The problem that we had in Northern Ireland, and indeed still have, is two very, very strong conflicting political ambitions. One ambition wants Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom in perpetuity. One other conflicting ambition wants Northern Ireland to be returned to become part of the island of Ireland. It's sometimes referred in shorthand as a united Ireland. And that's what was fought about for many, many generations. How that was resolved in the Good Friday Agreement was that those who signed the Good Friday Agreement, which was then passed by referenda north and south of the border in Ireland, so it's taken to be the expressed will of the people, it was agreed that Northern Ireland would remain part constitutionally of the United Kingdom. Now that was a big give from people like me who think that it was effectively a form of colony. It is a colony. And you can go back through all the rights and wrongs of colonization. So our act of generosity was to acknowledge that Northern Ireland would remain a constitutional part of the United Kingdom for as long as that was the express wish of the people of Northern Ireland. But at the same time, the Unionists, those who wanted that link with Britain, they in turn conceded that if at any time people in Northern Ireland changed their minds and wanted a united Ireland, there would be a referendum. And if the referendum said yes to United Ireland, then the governments, both in Ireland, both in Dublin and in London, would facilitate that. So in a sense, everybody had everything to play for. And that's really where it sits at the moment. There will be, from time to time, a test of the constitutional ambition of the people of Northern Ireland. At the moment, there is no date given for the first referendum on a united Ireland. My own view, for what it's worth right now, is that the most important thing to concentrate on is the reconciliation of the people on the island. And I'm talking about the person to person, heart to heart, people to people, doing the things that we did not do in the past, being visitors and tourists with each other, being connected through business. When I took office, the land border in the European Union, throughout the European Union, with the least commerce across it, was the land border between North and South in Ireland. I mean, just think, how stupid is that? I mean, it's just actually stupid. There's no other word for it. If you're trying to sell goods in Newry in County Down, and the nearest place to you is Dundalk, you know, a few miles down the road, but you're damned if you're going to send anything down to that crowd, because they're a bunch of whatever. And the other crowd are saying, well, I'm not selling stuff to them because they are. So, in other words, we've seen each other as Catholic, Protestant, nationalist, loyalist, instead of neighbours who are consumers and the cheapest and easiest people to sell your goods to. Anyway, that has all changed now, thankfully. I mean, we got sense eventually. We grew up eventually when these ridiculous stupidities and vanities were pointed out. And it was pointed out to us the damage they were doing. We were you know, doing the stupid thing, shooting ourselves in the foot. So it seems to me this is where we concentrate our efforts now, on doing all the things that are right. And the Good Friday Agreement has created a number of connections between North and South that are flourishing now along in those areas where it makes sense for us to work together. People are working together politically. The political climate has changed so much that politicians who, years gone by, would never have set foot from Belfast to Dublin, would never have travelled that road. It's normal now. They all work together. And it seems to me that that's what we concentrate on, the normalization of good neighbourly relationships that make sense and that contribute to ending that naked, raw, angry sectarianism that is always has a gravitational pull on us. Because one of the things I've learned over these years is the shelf life of the toxic spores of hatred is very, very long. So we have to be very wary of that. And those of us who believe in the Christian gospel, those of us who believe in this force of love, the most important thing that we can do is to keep doing the small things and keep on doing them until such times as we are sure that those toxic spores have been rendered neutral, have been effectively neutered. So I don't know how long that's going to take, quite frankly. And my own political ambition would be for a united Ireland, but not if I thought that in the doing of that we would cause a conflagration which would again engulf another generation. To me, that would not be worth it. What would be worth it would be a long process of reconciliation when that question is posed, and when people answer that they want a united Ireland, it would be because they feel that place would be, could be their home, that they would be welcome fully in that home, not that they would have been won over by the simple force of numbers, you know, that this is a place of embrace of everybody. So I think that's, for me, that's the most important political ambition currently. Thank you for that question. Somebody else had a question here. I'll come back to you in a second. Yes?
You spoke of the process of reconciliation as involving persons to persons. How do you feel about the handshake, for an example, between Martin McGuinness and the Queen, and the other examples that you have been exposed to that gives us hope for that process?
You know, that is such a very important, iconic moment that you mentioned, when Martin McGuinness met the Queen. And it underpins something that I feel is very strong about the peace. Peace building is a step-by-step process. And it's important to believe that even, no matter how insignificant the step is, the fact that you have made it, particularly if it's made in virgin territory, allows somebody coming behind you to move into that space now, because it's a place that isn't going to sink or blow up on them, right? There's no landmine there, there's no swamp. So that one little space that you have colonized is very important. So let me go back to the Martin McGuinness business. When Her Majesty the Queen came to Ireland, the party that he represents, Sinn Féin, did not welcome her. They opposed the visit. And that was their prerogative to do that. We invited them to everything and they said no. Then they watched the reception that she got. And 2 days into that reception, when it was very evident that the Irish people really wanted this moment, they felt that they were ready for this moment and they wanted it. On the third day, she was due to visit a place called Cashel in County Tipperary. Now, the mayor of Cashel was a member of Sinn Féin, and inevitably we felt that he would not meet her. As a member of Sinn Féin, they had all been instructed that they were not to have anything to do with the visit. He decided he would meet her. And he decided, in other words, that he would represent not just his party, but he would represent the people of the area who wanted to welcome her. And he did that. And once he did that, we knew then that, in a sense, it was over. And because we'd all moved into that space, and because the Sinn Féin constituency, bear in mind, I mean, politically, they have to bring their constituency with them. They are a very, very important constituency in the peace process. And the last thing we would want them to do is to fragment. So they had to be careful, and we frankly understood that. Would have preferred had things been different, but we understood it, and we told them that. But now, because the visit had been successful, and in particular, because of the places she had gone, that I think Sinn Féin were shocked by. They were shocked that on the first day, she went to the Garden of Remembrance in Ireland. The Garden of Remembrance remembers all the people who tried to get people like her out of Ireland. You know, it was for all the heroes who over many generations had fought against British rule. It was the first place she visited. She stood there, she placed a wreath, and then she did something that they would never have expected. Not a word. She simply bowed her head in solemn homage and took people's breath away in so doing. Then she went to a place called Croke Park. And again, they never expected that would happen. Croke Park is the place, back in 1920, it's a football stadium. Innocent enough place, you might think. But it's where we play our national games. We have our own national football game, Gaelic football. There was a football match going on this particular Sunday in 1920. The British Army tanks came in to the football game, opened fire, killed spectators and players alike. So, you can imagine, to invite the Queen of England there, to even get the organization that runs that place to feel that they would want her to come, that itself was a measure of how far Ireland had gone and how much Ireland wanted this new relationship with Britain. And she came there and she walked out onto the hallowed turf, stood in front of that part of the stadium that is called after a player who was murdered on that day by British troops, and she simply said, "Tell me what happened here." And in the doing of that, in the holding of, we play a game called hurling. Any of you ever seen hurling? It's kind of like a manic form of hockey. Hockey played by lunatics with an unpolished stick you can use both sides of. I unfortunately sent my daughter, my kids are both, two of my daughters are what we call, they're hurlers. And I sent them, when they moved to Dublin, to a school where that didn't play hurling. I didn't know, why don't they play hurling? Anyway, I didn't know. And they play hockey, and I said to my daughter, "Well, you can play hockey then." And one of my daughters said to me sneeringly, "Play hockey," she said. "An old polished stick you can only use one side of. And you can't raise it above your shoulder, are you mad?" So, you can imagine. So, what I'm saying to you really is in relation to then time moved on. A year after the Queen came to Ireland, to Dublin, she came to Northern Ireland. Now, Martin McGuinness, one of the main leaders of Sinn Féin, a member of the government in Northern Ireland, who had never ever shaken hands with a member of the royal family, and it was a matter of principle to them, he shook her hand. So you see, every little step out into virgin territory is important for the people coming behind you. You empower, you open, you create opportunity. And that for me was probably one of the most extraordinary moments, a very happy moment also. Sorry, you had a question.
Well, firstly, but I would like you to speak a bit about your role as a woman and how you would have shaped being in Ireland, that women presidents were a very new phenomenon, and the contribution that women have made to the working practice of the government.
The question, that's such an important question. It is the question of the role of women in relation to peace building and peacemaking. I succeeded Mary Robinson, who had been president from 1990 to 1997. I think the first time, and probably still is the first time in the history of world politics, where one woman has succeeded another in the presidency. And she and I both tell the same joke about the kids who say, the young boys who say in Ireland, "Mommy, can a man ever be the president?" But actually, and the answer to that is, well, maybe in about 2,000 years' time, perhaps. But actually, no, we've got a wonderful new male president now. We've handed the baton back for a while. But yeah, to be honest, I have to say that I think that if I go back to the visit of the Queen, just to take that particular episode, because of the iconic nature of it, I'm absolutely certain in my own mind that the fact that we were two women made something possible that otherwise may never have been possible. And I say that because as a woman, I've always been an outsider in places. As a Catholic, an outsider, By and large, I spent my life being a kind of a double deviant, sometimes even a triple or a quadruple deviant wherever I am. And like a lay person in the Gregorian, for example, where I currently am studying. I'm in the Gregorian University in Rome. So you're a lay person, a woman. Okay, Catholic's fine, right? You're not a deviant in that respect. So sometimes you wonder. And so I think to be an outsider is no harm, because you're not sucked into fitting a boxed shape. And that suited me, that we were able to do things, and if they went wrong, people would say, "Oh, what do you expect from that crowd of women anyway?" And if they went right, people would say, "Oh, that's interesting now. Maybe we should have thought of that." And Back in 1995, before I became president, 2 years before I became president, I had the opportunity to meet Queen Elizabeth in England under rather odd circumstances. My university was 150 years old. It was one of 3 colleges founded by her predecessor, Queen Victoria. We were having a shared event in London, and I was asked to take her around to meet. I was then Pro-Vice Chancellor of my university, so I was asked to show her around. Fine. Then some of my colleagues, rather mischievously, were saying to me, "Oh, you'll have to practice curtsying." I'm a Republican, I don't do curtsying to anybody. And I may also tell you, I don't kiss rings, I don't do curtsying. I meet people person to person, human being to human being. And I don't do false deference. And I thought to myself, right, this is a problem now. Because if it's expected, I also have enough respect for another human person that I would never embarrass them. And I certainly wouldn't embarrass them in public. So I took the opportunity of going. I asked for an appointment to meet the head of Her Majesty's household. And I went and I told him my dilemma. And he said to me, he said, "Curtsying's going out of fashion. Do what you like." He said, "She's a pro. It's fine, not a problem." So I met her, shook her hand, we walked around, we talked and chatted, and we got on very well together. But I had taken the precaution of saying to him, I said, "Are you interested to know why?" And I told him why. You know, about my family, my background, my identity, that every ancestor I have would rise up out of their graves and batter me to death with their bones, you know, if I shook hands with the Queen, or if I curtsied to the Queen. So I told him all of that. And I said, but you also must know that human being to human being, I admire this woman, and I have great respect for her as a leader, and for her commitment to duty, and for her Christianity. And so I want you to know that, and I'd like her to know that also. The next thing, I got a phone call to ask would I come and have lunch with her and talk to her about this, which I did. So I explained to her that when she spoke on television, you know, and spoke to the people of Northern Ireland, I never felt included, because she often talked about her loyal subjects, and I never felt very loyal. And a lot of my people didn't. And so there was already this problem of how would we relate to one another. And she was very interested. And then she told me something that stayed with me all through my presidency, that one of the greatest regrets of her life was the fact that she couldn't set foot on the soil of her nearest neighbouring country, the Republic of Ireland, for a lot of reasons. The first reason she evinced was the fact that she had 25 racehorses in Ireland and that she'd never seen them run there. She's mad into horse racing. And that was lovely and human and very funny. And then the second, of course, was that she knew with a deep passion the chasm of anger and mutual contempt and mutual simple failing to understand one another that existed between our two countries, that made of us not very good neighbours but not good neighbours. And she would like to contribute to making us good neighbours. And I said to her, well, if there's anything I can ever do in the future, then please God we'll be able to do that between us. And so and then you say, you know, you wonder, how did these things happen? And you say to yourself, on the days whenever you are a woman and feeling very up against it and feeling very alone, and then you remember, actually, you're not alone. None of us is alone in this world. We have a God who loves us. All we have to do is ask for his help. And I have no doubt that all the way along the line, he guided me and his feet guided me. And I think maybe in that way too, that women, I'm not saying particularly as we're in a week where Mrs. Thatcher is buried, and you know, I have to say that her politics would not have been my politics. So women do not speak with one voice or have one heart, but they do bring to things in the world we live in a different perspective, and a set of different perspectives that it seems to me the world could well do with. And you mentioned particularly the peace-building work, and when I'm talking about the one-to-one community work, that work was done for the most part by women. Why? Because they didn't take part in the bigger world of politics. That bigger world of politics was designed for men, it was designed for macho guys, it was designed for fellas with tattoos, you know. It wasn't designed, and it still actually is not shaped for women. I mean, in my own parliament back home in Ireland, there only are 13% women, because the shape of parliamentary work, the nature of political life, currently still doesn't suit the way women's lives are shaped and organised. I mean, I know we're multitaskers, but you know, that sometimes is just a stretch too far. And so I think women's charism is powerfully at work in peace building, but still has yet to come into its own because of the obstacles, the great obstacle course that is out there. Seamus Heaney has a wonderful expression in a poem of his called From the Canton of Expectation, my favourite poem. And you probably have heard me, I'm always quoting it. But he's talking about what happened when free second level education happened. And suddenly people who never had the opportunity for education suddenly got hungry for it and could see that all the old world of privilege and elites could fall away now because they now had access to the things that only elites used to have. But he describes them coming into the university, the first flood of these youngsters, from the working class areas like Ardoyne or from the farming lands of Balahi with their weird accents and their uncultivated, as Mike's son would say, all the boggers landing up among the cultivated, literati. And he describes them as having intelligences brightened and unmannerly as crowbars. It's a brilliant, brilliant expression. And we needed to be crowbars because the world in front of us was just a gigantic big obstacle course that needed crowbars to push these obstacles out of the way. We still have them. And until women, it seems to me, until the bird's flying on two wings. I mean, take our church as an example, and our world. I mean, God gave us two wings to fly on. What do? Well, we insist on flapping about in one. And I don't know if you've ever seen a bird fly on one wing. Have you ever seen a bird trying to get elevation, velocity on one wing? And then they wonder, why is it moored, parked, can't get up? And worse again, not only are they flapping about on the one wing, but that wing every so often comes around and beats the crap out of the one on this side. And why? Why? And this is not the world that God intended. God intended a world where we flew elegantly, gracefully, elevated up. Have you ever seen, I don't know if you've ever watched the Brent geese take off on a summer's day in Ireland. If you watch the Brent geese and they take off, and there's just something gorgeous. Because not only do they take off individually beautifully, but the very formation that they take off in helps all the ones behind. It's scientifically so smart. You've all got to be in the same formation, and you help each other. And we've not arrived at that point yet. We've not arrived at that great science he told us. Christ, that's why God the Father gave up on us and had to send Christ down, because we were just faffing about. And send Christ down to tell him, what works in this world, the engine, the fuel of healing, the fuel that brings human beings to perfection is love. And that love means respect for everything that God gave us and using all that talent that God gave us. Not saying you can't because. You mentioned earlier my Passionist connections. And I love the Passionists. I've only one son, Justin. He's called after a Passionist priest who was my pastor and who died when I was 18. And I promised myself the day he died, if I have a son, his name will be Justin. So Martin had no say in the matter. Poor fellow. So we have a wonderful son, Justin, now. But my other pastor was a man called Father Honorius, whom my brother actually is called off, but luckily called after. Every child in my family is called after a Passionist priest. I have 5 brothers and 3 sisters. They're all called after Passionist priests. And then whenever we ran out of kids, we started calling our pets. So we had 3 goldfish called Father Ailby. And so we were a big connection with the Passionists. But anyway, this particular Passionist, Father Honorius, he was the first person that when I was 14, he asked me what I'd like to do when I left school, by which I think he thought I would leave school at 15 or 16. And I said that I was minded to become a lawyer. And he was instantly upset. And the first words I heard were, you can't. You can't because you're a woman, and you can't because nobody belonging to you is in the law. Now, actually, on both counts, he was only articulating a very commonly held view, and not a view that was just held by Catholic priests, incidentally, but just a view that was held by a lot of people, because the very first book that I got as a law student said exactly that. What are you doing here? You know, the only reason why women come into law is to get good husbands, which is why I married a dentist for pure spite. And that first conversation with him provoked in my mother something that I'd never seen before, because ours was a house where priests were always welcome, and my mother instantly just threw him out. And she just said to him, "You out," and then she said to me, she said, "Don't listen to him." And that's actually an edited version of what my mother said. That's the diplomatic version. But in fairness to him, when I got into law school, a few years later, when I passed exams and got into law school, he was the first person on my doorstep, and he did something that had never happened to me in my life before. He brought myself and another young girl, who was also a parishioner of his, out for dinner. I had never been out to a restaurant in my life for dinner. This was an amazing phenomenon. And it was ruined completely, because that was the night, regrettably, that when we arrived back in my parish and he was dropping me back to my door, the first thing that I saw were uniformed officers of a police force called the B Specials, an ancillary police force. I saw them setting fire to Catholic homes in my parish. So that was when war broke out, civil war broke out. That's when every day became a Boston day. And in that moment, I had to ask myself, do I get angry here? You know, do I get angry enough to do something nasty back? Or do I do something different? And that's when the gravitational pull of the Passionists really, really kicked in my life. Good catechesis, good leadership, tremendous leadership from the Passionist community, and the leadership of my parents, which under no circumstances would have ever, ever, ever given us cause to go and join paramilitary organizations. Now, I'm very grateful for that, because other friends of mine and acquaintances of mine made different choices in life, and there, but for the grace of God, go I or anyone else. And so I think, let's use what God gave us. Let's not put false obstacles in the way of what God gave us, particularly when it is evident we need all the help we can get. So, another question, yes. Other friends of mine and acquaintances of mine made different choices in life, and there, but for the grace of God, go I or anyone else. And so I think, let's use what God gave us. Let's not put false obstacles in the way of what God gave us, particularly when it is evident we need all the help we can get. So, another question, yes.
I'm curious about your pursuing studies of canon law.
I know, everybody is.
Some of the difficulties that we have, I think, in the church is that too many bishops are canon lawyers and not pastors. You're talking about pastoral life as the president, studying canon law.
Yes, I'm a civil lawyer by avocation before I became president, at least an academic lawyer. And and I do wonder myself sometimes, I have to say, about canon law. And but on the other hand, it is the law of our church, and there are vast swathes of it, vast swathes that nobody is bothering their head to do anything about. One of the reasons being, I think, that first of all, it has been dominated by clerics, and it has been dominated by clerics who are going to work in diocesan chanceries for the most part, and who are going to work in the field of marriage nullity for the most part. So you have this extraordinary phenomenon of a very interesting and in many ways quite an exciting area of law that has been, if you like, pulled like a web. The web has been pulled in one direction, and a lot of the other work that needs to be done has not been done. For example, to take a very, very small example, the area that I'm currently researching in is the area of canon law and children and childhood, what the Code of Canon Law says about children and childhood. You could write that actually in the back of a very small postage stamp. And, but if you look at the history of canon law, which is one of the great delights for me, is to go right back, because it's also, canon law is also, of course, the underpinning of American common law. It's the underpinning of English common law. It's the underpinning of Irish law. It was what we all had as a legal system. It's what every sophisticated legal system in Europe and America grew out of. So it has a huge richness that it seems to me has become, it's been allowed to just develop a kind of sediment. And I'd like, I think, if I could, to contribute in some way to maybe chipping away at some of that and letting, perhaps let some new energy bubble through. It is mind-numbingly awful for a lot of the time. And then other times it's electrifyingly wonderful. And so I'm hoping, if I can, in the work that I'm doing, to be able... See, I believe in using the law. I made that decision that night that I mentioned, when I came back into my parish and I saw these people in uniform do what they did, act unlawfully, but with the might of law behind them and the uniform of law. And I made a decision there and then, and I can still remember it so clearly. I made a decision. I used the law. And many times I had to remind myself whenever I was pulled towards more, I suppose more angry things to do, to remind myself, use the law, because it is a phenomenal tool. And so I think that we can use the law. That's what I hope to do. Whether I'm right in that, well, who knows, time will tell, but it's a grand old way to pass a retirement. And also to know that I'm a very happy student in the Gregorian University in Rome. I don't really fit into the liturgy or lace thing, which is no harm. I think it's good to be in places where you are the outsider. And by virtue of being there, people have to listen to you say things that they'd prefer weren't said. And you have to remind them, well, actually, do you see, when you go back out into a parish, you're going to meet Bolsheviks like me. And you're not going to have the joy of sitting talking to people who all either agree with you or pretend to agree with you. And I'm also at a very happy stage in my career where I feel I can say more or less anything now. I don't have to be as diplomatic as I used to have to be. And I think that there's a value in that also, because regrettably, I think we've come through a time where we have, where we have suppressed voices and with the pull of the so-called rope of obedience. And I think that the church I want to live in is a church, where people can say what they feel. And we don't then say to them, well, if you don't tick all these boxes, you can't go to communion, or if you don't tick all these boxes, you can't really be a true Catholic, or why don't you leave? Because I'm 61 years a cradle Catholic, and I want to end my days in my church, because just like my mother and father are my home and my hearth, it is my hearth, my home. And I would feel outside of it the same way I would feel if my mother and father took me and abandoned me and said, you're no longer part of our home. So I'd like to think that maybe in some way through the writing that I might do in canon law and the work that I'll do in it, that maybe I can make a plea for that. Just as to finish it off, actually, one of our politicians in Northern Ireland once described Northern Ireland memorably. He's a Protestant politician who made a great contribution to the peace process, a man called David Trimble. And David Trimble said that he acknowledged that Northern Ireland was a cold house for Catholics. And just last year, when I was launching a book that I had written on collegiality, I made the point that I feel that the Catholic Church has also become a cold house for some Catholics. And I think that's sad. It's not the place I want to be in, it's not the space I want to be in. Insofar as I have any life left in me, I'd like to be part of the kind of thing you're doing here. A church that is family, that is home, where we sit around the table and we argue the toss, but we love one another enough to be able to trust each other with the gift of church and faith. So. I want this back to you. Okay. Thank you.
Of all of us here, how really extraordinary and exceptional your presentation for us, your conversation for us today. It's very moving, very And wherever you may be, this is a place that won't be a cold home. This is a warm-hearted, welcome place for you, and we're honored that you are here with us, and thank you so much for that. We have a little token here. I should have Terry Stadler, who's there. He's one of the people in charge of our lay formation program. Our lay students are here. We also have a spiritual formation program. And this is a bit of Chicago Irish lore. We do have some Irish in Chicago, as you may have heard. And Terry, could you explain a little bit about what this was?
Thank you.
Do you have time for a short story?
Why not? Why not?
There was a young police officer in Chicago in the 1890s, a fella from West Cork, Francis O'Neill. And Francis, as he walked his beat along the city tenements here on the south side, would listen to the songs that were lost from the experience of Ireland. And he would write them down as he walked his beat. And over the series of 5 or 8 years, he collected about 1,000 Irish songs that otherwise would have been lost. And so this is a small token from this.
This is the Chief O'Neill.
It is, well, Chief Francis O'Neill.
Chief Francis, oh my gosh, thank you so
Yes,
much.
you're welcome. And
Thank
these
you.
are the collection of
Oh,
songs that
thank you.
he put together.
I've heard so much about these. Thank you
Oh,
ever
yeah,
so
you're
much.
welcome.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I really appreciate it.